television network that has interviewed as many politicians as Sky News has done in its 25 years on air. And of them all, no other politician in our generation has spent as long in the corridors of power in this country than my guest tonight. Philip Ruddock first walked into the old Parliament House as a federal MP in September 1973. He was there when Gough said this.
We say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
And he walked out of the other house on the Hill 43 years later.
It is a matter of balance. It is not easy to leave. Contribution in this Parliament, if you can make it, is extraordinarily important.
Only Prime Minister Billy Hughes has served the Australian people longer. And in that time, Philip Ruddock made his mark as Immigration Minister and Attorney General, creating legislation on asylum seekers and counter-terrorism that would provide the backbone of our policies for decades to come. And as events unfold in Afghanistan today, it's his legislation that will dictate who comes to this country over the next few years and how prepared we are if terrorism were to return to our shores. Philip Ruddock, great to have you on the program.
Pleasure, Chris.
Let's talk about now, before we talk about 43 fascinating years, 2 decades in Afghanistan, 41 Australian lives lost. Was it all for nothing?
Well, I don't think you can ever say it was all for nothing. Obviously, there were issues arising after 9/11 that we needed to address. The question is, was it done sufficiently well and adequately? I mean, obviously, I'm very disappointed about the outcome, which means that people in Afghanistan can't live under the rule of law free in the way in which we do here in Australia. And obviously, it's very disappointing when you're seeing people having to flee in circumstances that many are. But they are difficult issues to manage. I understand the circumstances in which the Prime Minister is having to address these issues, and he wants to do it, I think, in a responsible and appropriate way, and I would counsel him on that. It's certainly important to have a generous program to help refugees. Can I say Australia has always been a country that has been at the forefront amongst those who do assist refugees.
Yeah, just on that point, when the Prime Minister said this week that Afghani refugees must come here through the right channels, and he was very forceful about this, it must have hit you at the time that this was what much of your political work was all about, creating the right and wrong channels.
Well, I've used different words, but I think it's the same import. I talk about integrity. I want to help those who need help most. You can't do that if you allow your capacity to assist them to be undermined by those who are free enough to travel, have the money to pay a smuggler, and are going to get to the front of the queue and say, I am the most important person who needs to be helped. I don't think that is the judgment. I think they have to submit their claims and have them judged against all the others that you might want to entertain and see whether or not they're the most in need.
Do you believe any of these Taliban promises about a peaceful transition, a peaceful existence, no retribution against NGOs or government workers, and of course women's rights? Do you believe the Taliban for 1 second?
Well, you may have some people who believe that if they're going to be able to take their place in the international community, they have to be more observant of international criteria, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for instance. But I suspect they're dealing with a lot of people who have been essentially at war. I think it's going to be a population that is exceedingly hard to manage. And even if you came with what I would regard as the right intention at the national level, I'm not sure that you would necessarily be able to manage it in the way in which it is often portrayed. I think it will be challenging.
Yeah, to say the least. You were in Canberra during some quite amazing times, some turbulent times, but Australia has experienced nothing like this pandemic, has it? It would be the one time, if you were a budding, aspiring politician, where someone else can take the Prime Ministership.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, if you're in a position to lead, you do so in the circumstances that confront you. And I recognise.
But what a wretched job, Philip. What a wretched job during this period.
Well, I recognise it's a very challenging environment, but the more challenging the environment, the more it will make the people who are there, in my judgment. But having said that, you go into public life to serve the Australian people, and that's always been my view. And you have to serve in the circumstances that confront you. And it is often very challenging and very difficult. You have to take difficult decisions, but you ought to be prepared to do that. And you ought to be prepared to go out and defend the decisions you have to take, to explain in sensible and reasoned arguments why what you are doing is most appropriate for the Australian people.
Talking about turbulent, I want to go back to 1975 now and Whitlam's sacking. You were just 32. It must have seemed surreal to one of the newest members of Parliament at the time.
Well, it certainly did. I was on the steps when Whitlam made his speech about Sir John Kerr that everybody remembers. But I was there in the party room when we were having to look at what decisions we would take in relation to supply. And I am one of those who accepts the arguments that when you had a difference of view between the House of Representatives and the Senate, it needed to be resolved, and the way in which the Governor-General in the end had to resolve it was a very difficult situation, but he faced that situation because we, who were part of the coalition at that time, in our party room, held the line that we would continue to deny supply to the Whitlam government. And it was in the context, and people need to remember this, it was in the context of which a government was spending extravagantly, had embarked upon a whole new range of directions. People in the Labor Party were gratified that the government was spending money without regard to where it was going to come from. They saw that as their objective. We in the coalition believed in responsible budgeting and took the view that the Australian people ought to be able to decide on whether they wanted to go into very, very considerable debt into the future. Of course, there was an election, and the election outcome was resounding. I mean, the Fraser government defeated Whitlam in these circumstances where the Governor-General had come to a view that the Parliament should be dissolved.
Yep, a landslide. I was trawling through some old tapes featuring you. Remind us again, what was with wearing the safari jacket in Parliament in 2015? And where did you get such a thing?
We used to dress like that at that time. I mean, people talk about the weather and so on. I mean, don't you remember we had a Premier of South Australia who had worn a safari suit?
Yep.
and we had others who came to Canberra, and I was one of those who had a wardrobe of safari suits. One of them was very nicely tailored and appropriate for, I think, wearing in the Parliament. And
you did it for charity, didn't you?
Well, in the end, I did it for charity. But we had the more recent speaker allow me to address again, just to for historical purposes. I still have one suit left.
Yeah, it's no secret that in the beginning you and John Howard were not close colleagues, but that changed.
Well, that is wrong. That is wrong. John Howard and I have been friends over a very long period of time. We came through the Young Liberal movement. He, several years before me, he was the party Young Liberal president when I was a youngster, and so I served under him. And he was the first of those who was elected to that office in the New South Wales division. I came to it later, and I served with him while he was a member of the same executive. And in fact, I was there, and I can remember this when he and Jeanette met. We did so through the Institute of Political Science summer schools in Canberra, which we used to all go to at that time. And I can remember Jeanette lived close to an old friend of mine from law school, and I can remember the occasion in which on my little yacht that I had at Neutral Bay long before I went into public life when I was a young lawyer making some money, I took John out and Jeanette. I don't think he was the great sailor that I was, but we bonded together. Obviously, we went into Parliament. I went in shortly before him. He told me he wasn't running against me in Parramatta because he'd been advised that there may be a better opportunity. And that ended up being Bennelong, which came about 6 months later. I think we were served together over a period of time, and we obviously were able to express our views as one should in a government situation in Cabinet, and we worked together as a team. And you don't always see things precisely in the same way, but he respected me, and I greatly respect and admire him.
That is a great snapshot of history between the pair of you. That's interesting. There's no retirement, obviously, in your DNA. When you left the Parliament, you became a special envoy on human rights. Malcolm Turnbull got you to do that small job of rewriting the Marriage Act. Plus you're mayor of Hornsby and state president of the New South Wales Liberal Party. Haven't you got a golf course near where you live?
Well, I'm a member of a golf club, but and we do have Pennant Hills, which is in the Shire, and Asquith. There are golf clubs around, and yes, I do see a great deal of the parks locally, and I'm well known for being active in the routes that I take. But look, put it to one side. I was always there to assist as I could. The Special Envoy for Human Rights was because of my passion in relation to human rights issues. I've been a long-standing member of Amnesty International. I'd had an advocacy role in relation to the abolition of the death penalty worldwide. I wanted to see Australia on the UN Human Rights Council to play a part in getting us elected. It was a unique opportunity. To undertake the inquiry in relation to religious freedom reflected, again, my interest in human rights. And one of the things that I became very conscious of is that there are lots of human rights, and sometimes they appear to be in conflict, and the way in which you use proportionality as the appropriate argument is something that I even talk about today in relation to vaccines and the right to life. Why am I the Mayor of Hornsby? I'm the Mayor of Hornsby because I was brought up in this community. I sat at my father's feet when he was the Shire President at an early point in time. It's a community that means a great deal to me. I wanted to ensure that we were able to put in place appropriate policies and programs to maintain its unique character, its very special place for the people who had given me so much support over a long period of time.
It's a wonderful full circle when you think about local government in those terms, especially for your family. Now, just on Malcolm, I have to ask this question on behalf of Sky News viewers. You're the state president of the Liberal Party. You can't have a word to him about stopping being a miserable old ghost, or would you even consider expelling him?
Look, I'm the president of the Liberal Party and I'm a team player. And I emphasise always the importance of being a team player. And it's not going to help if I comment on the way in which we may deal and address these issues if I undermine the capacity to hold the show together.
OK. Maybe just have a quiet, informal word with him, maybe, because he's doing a hell of a lot of damage.
He may be listening, and as I say, I believe in the team. I've supported the team. I work for the team. I work for him, and I've worked for his successors. And I'm there as part of the team, and that's what I continue to do.
Philip Ruddock, thank you for your service to this country on behalf of our audience, and thank you so much for giving me as much as you've given me in terms of time. Much appreciated.
Always a pleasure, Chris. We'll enjoy watching you.
You're very, very kind, but thank you very much once again.